Okay, well, welcome everyone this morning to our exciting Google Hangout on young feminist leadership and how we can take the work forward within ActionAid. And Jana and myself will be co-facilitating you through this process today. So welcome. The aim of today is really to explore a little bit about how we're defining young feminist leadership and how we want to institutionalize it. And before I hand over to my co-facilitator Anjana, who's over there in Dhaka at the moment, I thought it would be great to kickstart with a round of introductions. So perhaps everyone can say, starting from the left of the screen, a little bit about yourself. So your name, your role, and perhaps an interesting reflection that you would like to share about young feminism in the country that you're based in. So if we kickstart over with Anjana, that would be lovely. Over to you, Anjana.
Thank you, Sarah. Good afternoon, everyone. We are in a different time zone right now, and it's so wonderful to be together and talk about feminist leadership. Myself, I'm Anjana. I'm from Nepal, and I work with Training for Change based in Nepal. I've done training in Asia. Thank you. Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Anjana. Perhaps if we move on to Catherine, based in Joburg.
Sure. So hi, I'm Catherine. I'm the Youth Activism and Activist Coordinator based in Johannesburg. I am very passionate about feminist leadership. Joanna Coe, the previous chief exec, was very passionate about this subject, so it's totally rubbed off on me, and I think it's something that we really need to build in ActionAid and elsewhere as well. I think sort of bringing young women is really important. And then my lovely colleague Audrey has just come in. Audrey, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello.
So just your name, your role, and what you think about young feminist leadership.
Okay, maybe I'll introduce myself, my name, and then give me time to think about
Sure.
it. Yeah, my name is Audrey. I work in. Oh, do I have to say what I'm doing?
Yeah, just so they have an idea.
Okay, I am the HRBA Capacity Building Officer for a particular project, the Far Green Global Project. That's all.
Cool.
Great, thanks very much, Audrey. Lovely. So if we move over to Falonye in Nairobi, please.
So, hi everyone. My name is Falonye. I hope I'm clear enough. Yes. And I'm the Young Feminist Activism Manager at the Association for Women's Rights and Development. I'm based in Nairobi, Kenya. And for me, I think there's really a strong case for young feminist leadership, especially because we know that young women are actually what is needed to rejuvenate and to sustain women's rights activism. So I'm really glad and honored to be part of this conversation, and I'm very behind the move to actually promote a young feminist leadership incorporation in the work of ActionAid.
Thank you very much. Luckmore.
My name is Luckmore Jalisi. I'm the Youth and Governance Habit Change Program with ActionAid Denmark. I'm actually more interested in learning from the guys who have been doing young feminist leadership. We have a strong feminist program here in Liberia, but in terms of stepping down to the youth, we haven't done well. So for me, it's more of learning in terms of how best we can bring that to the youth program.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luckmore. That's great. And just in case people don't know, but I think you do, so I'm the International Youth Policy Advisor for ActionAid International based here in London. And apologies we have today from Christy, who's our Women's Rights Programme Manager in International. Unfortunately, she's got flu. Baishali, the Programme Manager for the Young Urban Women Project, but Anjana will be, and I will mention a little bit about that exciting work in the Federation. So that is great. So over to Anjana to give a little bit of background around the training resources that we've started to develop.
Thank you, Sarah. But before that, I'd like to introduce two of my colleagues who are here with me.
Hi.
Over to you guys.
I'm Anusha, and I'm the Training Quality Coordinator here at the Global Platform Bangladesh.
Hello, my name is Sahana. I'm working as a training officer in Global Platform.
And we'll be working with Anjana on the Young Feminist Leadership course coming up in November.
Thank you. So this idea of developing a course came to us as a part of our bigger strategy, but also like Training for Change has trained young people all over the world for a long time now. But still we have been observing that young women are not taking leadership. And also it is important that we take this forward, being a feminist ourselves and believing in equality and human right-based approach. We are trying to develop a course which would be launched, the pilot would be in November in GD Bangladesh, where we have expert trainers to take it forward. And the questions we are asking now is like, how do we empower young people to pursue feminist principles when we create spaces for them to engage in our programs and campaigns? So it's more or less about developing leadership, but with a feminist lens. And that's what we have realized, that it is a very much need of an hour. Yeah.
Great, thanks Anjana. So we're really at sort of early stages of developing some capacity building and training, and this builds on from a call the end of last year that we had to strengthen our young feminist leadership. So it's particularly important now to just sort of share a little bit of background. So I'm just going to step in for Christy, who is going to be presenting around the feminist group that started in ActionAid. And then I'll hand over to Anjana to mention briefly on the Young Urban Women Project. And then we hear from Felonie around the work that AWID is starting. And then we'll open up for discussion. So I hope that sounds exciting. We'll keep this short and sweet. So just a little bit of background. Thomas, if you could pull up the presentation for us, please.
Yes, just a second. There you go. Okay, do you see it?
Great, thanks very much. So I won't, oh, it's disappeared.
The presentation?
Great, lovely.
Okay.
Thanks. So if you can, brilliant, move on to the next slide. So what we have is, just going to get it myself. Okay, so the Feminist Leadership Monitoring Group that Christy was going to be presenting on basically kickstarted at the end of 2014, and this was based on feedback from 2013, which highlighted the need for the leadership team to recommit on institutionalizing women's rights. So this small group, of which Christy's a part of and a few other colleagues, including Eni, came together, I guess, to put increasing pressure on the organization. The role, the Feminist Leadership Monitoring Group, another nice acronym there we've got, is tasked with defining, monitoring and evaluating organizational commitments to women's development and feminist leadership. And it plays an advisory role to the chief exec, to Adriano. And it says, and Christy was really keen for me to share that the point of this group is to be representative of, rooted in, and accountable to all women staff. So the experiences that we have within ActionAid as women, our concerns, our needs, and our rights. So it's quite an interesting group that's kick-started. In terms of accountabilities, I won't go through all of the different points there, but there's a degree of monitoring progress on commitments from the Directors Forum. There's an aspect around ensuring that the national boards of each of our country programs are brought on board with feminist leadership and providing oversight and coherence in the various internal women's development and leadership initiatives. So our initiative that Anjana briefly mentioned to develop a training course specifically for young feminists, we're making sure that we're keeping connected to this bigger organizational group. In terms of the group has developed a set of work streams and expected outcomes. So that involves a new strategy, it involves women's forums, it involves a survey, it involves connecting with HR policy, and so forth. So they've developed a work stream, and their priority this year is to develop that strategy as well as a charter of feminist principles. So that will be quite important for us as the youth community of practice within ActionAid, also to make sure that we're bringing in young feminist aspects into that. Christy's PowerPoint goes on to the current status. So I think the most important point to pull out of that is that they are producing a bunch of resources, including a middle manager leadership manual to help support. And Nisat from ActionAid Bangladesh is being involved as a young person. So we're looking at how we strengthen and make sure that we get that young female, that young feminist perspective across our two different streams of work. So that's exciting. And then the members, that slide gives you a little bit of an overview. So it includes international, it includes national colleagues from Zimbabwe, country directors, Josephine from Rwanda, Farah from Bangladesh. So Christy was going to end her presentation with any questions, but I wondered, because Christy's not here, that perhaps if anyone did have any questions specifically relating to this broader organisational group, if you can put them in the chat boxes, and we'll make sure that we take those on to Christy and her team. Before I hand over to Anjana, just to briefly mention on the Young Urban Women project, I wonder if anyone had any quick reflections on Christy's presentation.
I just want to, I don't know whether it's a question or a comment, but I wanted to put on the table sort of reflection as we are talking about the feminist leadership group that we have created, and we are at the same time talking about young leadership feminism, which I think is for me it's two separate things, because the group that we created, we started, it's more internal, and then when we talk about young feminism, it's more external. So it will be very interesting to sort of in our approach to see how to connect both. Because when we talk about young feminism, it's more about girls in community, what they are doing, how can they be leader in their own community. But when we talk about the forum, it's more about us women within ActionAid. And then I think maybe for me, we can still connect together, but we need to think how. But also when we are talking about my own experience as a young, and,
she's very young. Very young.
I think the concept in terms of feminism is quite not misunderstood, but diverse, and we need to have a common sense. And I think the idea of having a sort of feminism principle could be very interesting to guide us to know, as a feminist, what am I supposed to act in my community? As a feminist, what am I supposed to think? I'm a feminist, who am I supposed to work with? That's quite interesting. Leadership, I also think we need to actually contextualize it within a young context. Because most of the time when we talk about leadership, it's me, Audrey, thinking maybe tomorrow I will be a country director. But what does that mean for a young girl, 15 years, sitting in a community? What does that really mean for her? That's where you could see the disconnection between the feminists internally and externally. So I also, really interesting to hear about the training course. I am sitting in the unit, the learning capacity building unit, and we are very quite strong in terms of, you know, providing capacity building. So for me, my addition is, let's not only focus on the training course, but trying to look at the broad capacity, because this is quite key. How can we build capacity in a broader way? And what we have now, we are using within the unit, which we call the blended learning. In addition to a course, to a training, we need to think about how can we continue to support young girls to continue use the knowledge from the training. This could be accompaniment process through learning visit, you know, people to people support, but also what are the things that we can provide in terms of online courses that can continue to build. I was amazed when I was in Zambia and I met activists. It's quite interesting to see how young are quite committed in some of the issues we are working on. And then the shocking things was the young girl within the group. It was like six young people that I met. It was only one young girl. And then you could see how she could struggle in terms of equipping herself, self-developing, to get knowledge in terms of some of the issue, because she can't access, she doesn't have a computer, and then she can't access to many things compared to other boys. So I think those are things when we will be talking about training. How can we continue to support those younger community to build their own knowledge in terms of feminism and leadership? So that's my own contribution.
Great, thank you, Audrey. I think those are really useful points. And perhaps, so there were three main ones there. So one around the potential different focus between external and internal, between our work with young feminists and our broader organisational work on feminists. Perhaps I'll just add something on that. And then your point around the concept of feminism being very diverse. And perhaps, Felonia, you can perhaps speak to that and give some of your thoughts from an AWID perspective when you talk about your work on AWID after Anjana. That would be great. And then the final area around broader capacity, Audrey, that you bring up, and I think that's perhaps where Anjana might have a few reflections. So Anjana, if you're able to tag on some thoughts and responses as you speak, that would be great. So just before handing over to Anjana, around this kind of idea of is our broader feminist work and the particular group internal, and whereas our work with young feminists perhaps more external in terms of our program delivery, our work in LRPs, etc. I think we're at really early stages. So our initial entry point for our work around promoting young feminist leadership is the training course that Anjana and with her colleagues there in Bangladesh are starting to develop and pilot. So it's by no means a comprehensive package. I guess Anjana and I had discussions, and then we connected with Baishali, Christy, Eni to say this is a call that's coming up to strengthening our young feminist leadership, and as a small group that's our entry point in our delivery. But I think it would be really exciting, as you say, Audrey, to find the bigger connections with the organisational group. But I would also just say that I think in terms of our young feminist work, I think it's really important that we also have some young feminists in that group, some young feminist perspectives on actually working in ActionAid. And as you were saying, the concept of leadership being much more than everyone just wanting to aspire to be country directors. So I guess it's a shame. It's a shame that Christy's not with us or any, but I think we do also have some internal work to do in that group to make sure that there is a young perspective coming. As we heard when we were in Cambodia recently, you know, we've got over 2,000 staff working across the Federation in ActionAid, and I think around 60% of those are young. So that therefore means that there's a significant amount that are young women within ActionAid, and how we can support and strengthen their roles and capacity is really important. So I thank you very much for sharing those. Perhaps now if we just...
Can I add a comment?
Please, yep, who's...
It's me, Catherine. Hi. I just wanted to flag as well. I mean, I know that this is it's a bit of a it's not an agreed topic in ActionAid about how we bring the men and boys into this conversation as well, because I think a lot of the time they're left out, and then it actually causes a lot of conflict because they don't understand what we're discussing and why we're discussing it. And young feminists can be boys. Feminists aren't just women. So I think it's really important that we also understand and have a way and a link to make sure that we're bringing men and boys into the conversation. But having our own spaces as women, but I think it's really important to make sure we're including that. Because I see feminist leadership as a hat, like a principles and how you do things, rather than a woman only or a girl only aspect.
Yeah, really important point. Thank you. And maybe Anjana and Filonye may have some suggestions or comments on that important point as well. Great. So over to Anjana now to tell us very briefly a little bit about the Young Urban Women Project on behalf of Baishali, who is unable to join today.
Yeah, sure, Sarah. But maybe before that, I'd just like to talk about the connection between the Feminist Charter that ActionAid is developing and this course. So as an institution, what we do is we take HRBA as an approach and then run our trainings, right? So in that way, what we are putting at the core now is our HRBA as well as the Feminist Charter that is going to be developed by the Feminist Monitoring and Leadership Group. So that would be our base. And when we are talking about looking not only at the training, as a broader capacity development, we are also thinking in terms of providing a mentor to young women and men. So the target group for the training would be both men and women. We have drawn up a TOR where we have focused on training both young men and women because, like Catherine said, it's not possible to achieve what we want to achieve if we leave out the men and boys. So we are still trying to focus and to make it more interesting for men also to sign up for this training. Yeah, so with Baishali's presentation, so I've not been involved with this project, but I'm going to share in her absence. I'll share it in a very, I'll not share it broadly, but what I know of, yeah. So we did a midterm review for this project, Young Urban Women Project, which was held in India, Liberia, and India, Ghana, and South Africa. Sorry. Yeah. So with the midterm review, they came up with the 5 points, major points, where one of the findings was organizing young women into independent groups has been very successful mobilization strategy. And young women are now able to identify economic and sexual exploitation, both in their private lives, but also in the public sphere. And young women now have understood unpaid care work at a conceptual level and have been taking it up at the family and community level. So demanding the redistribution of unpaid care work, I think, which is a very good point. And also ensuring availability of a gender-responsive public services at the community level. But still, the work is only mid-level reflection. So I think there's a long way to go, but it's just a starting point. And also, young women are aware of their sexual and reproductive health and rights, and also oppressive gender norms, and have been expressing their opinions and feelings to their intimate partners. So, which in the past might not have been the case. Yeah. Also, efforts at building leadership of young women and engaging them in public advocacy have been initiated in all 3 countries. So these are some excellent results we have achieved And this is a midterm, so we expect to achieve much more results in the coming days. And yeah, and the training that would develop would also have some conceptual clarity on the basis of the findings of this project. Yeah.
Great, thanks Anjana. And I think the point about the Young Urban Women Project is that it's looking at the intersection between decent livelihoods and economic empowerment for young women and their sexual reproductive health rights. So that's been quite an interesting project to follow and learn from, and bringing in accountability, governance mechanisms, forums in their programming work around that, which is really interesting. Again, if anyone had any particular questions that we can take on by Charlie and the Young Urban Women Project team, then please do type them in, and we can get back on those. So we'll now move on to Felonia to share a little bit about her work managing the Young Activist Feminist program with AWID. And perhaps, Felonia, before you jump into that, it'd be great if you could share your definitions of your understanding of what young feminism is.
Okay. So thank you. I think for me, this is a very important conversation, and I actually have some definitions of what I feel is feminist leadership, first of all, and then how to integrate the young, because for us we just see young as a constituency and not something that should define our engagement in terms of the women's rights activism. So for me, one of the best definitions I've had of feminist leadership to date is by somebody called Gerda Lerner, and she says it's to create something that replaces and surpasses you, that has a life of its own, because there are many people who will be drawn into it and who will give leadership to it as a group. And so what this means is, even if you move on or you go away, the point is that wherever you are, as women, wherever we are situated in our lives, we can advance a feminist agenda. And for me, why this definition is so important is because you realize that feminist leadership is everywhere. Feminist leadership is in the home, is in the schools, and like now we're discussing about it in the institution in terms of ActionAid. And so for me, even in our approach as ActionAid, I would encourage us to think about something that lives beyond us. Beyond, I saw Christy's presentation, and there are certain people who've been listed as having the dream and the vision, but the vision needs to be strong enough and inspiring enough so that it's something that can live beyond the staff who would have started the thinking around it. Just to give you a little history, the Young Feminist Activism Program began in 2001 in AWID, and it specifically addresses activities that recognize the unique experiences and perspectives of young women activists. And it also works to support young women in their efforts to achieve women's rights and tackle global changes. So it actually became a formal entity in 2007, and so it complements the work plan of the whole of AWID strategic initiatives. So with over 8 years now of experience with working with young women, we are able to understand the most effective strategies that actually foster young feminist activism. And so this kind of approach influences our approach in the work. Once we actually took interest in engaging this constituency, we found out that some of the challenges the young feminists have in terms of leading big advocacy projects, leading their work and expressing the needs, is better access to funding, capacity building opportunities, and presence at international processes. And so I think it's good also that ActionAid is able to institutionalize this, because then you're able to address these needs within your programming. In terms of what the program does, one of the key things is fostering community and sharing information. And so, for example, like coming onto such sessions that have been invited to ActionAid, but also using our online platforms and the Feminist Wire. Secondly, it's research and knowledge building, because also being a good leader needs you to be an informed leader. And so one of the things that we have assessed and seen is a need for young feminists is the need to have good research, cutting-edge research, and the latest information. And then lastly, we also encourage effective multi-generational organizing. And so in as far as having our constituency as young feminists, we want them to be able to tap into the wisdom, the experience of the older feminists, but also infuse the enthusiasm, their different ways of organizing, for example, through social media, so that actually the women's rights activism is at its optimum level. Then lastly is engaging in global development processes such as the UN, but then also collaborating in all other areas. We know that even until recently we have young women human rights defenders whose lives are at risk, and what does that mean for them as young feminists? So actually addressing some of these issues. Lastly, I just wanted to speak to specifically the issue of leadership and how we unpack it in terms of feminist leadership. And we have something called the 4 Ps. And for us, and the presentation I've had is that the first step that Action Aid right now is trying to come up with is the practice and the principle. So the first P is the practice. And when you talk about the practice, it's basically how we are structuring things, developing strategies, training people, assessing and seizing opportunities. So that's one of the P's in feminist leadership. The second P is the principles. And I think I had Catherine also re-emphasizing the importance of having feminist principles informing the Young Feminist Leadership Program. And for example, one of the charters that has been developed, and maybe you can also refer to it as you develop the principles, is the African Feminist Charter, the AFF Charter. And I think why it's important to have the principles feeding into the leadership is because leadership does not occur in a moral or social or political vacuum. There are a lot of things that influence our leadership. In fact, if anything, the use of power occurs before we become feminists, because that's how we've been cultured. But then we have to have principles that are able to break down that power, to investigate, and see what kind of powers are there in this organization, which kind of leads me to the third P, which is power. And power is very dynamic in organization. There's visible power, where we have the hierarchies, and young feminists want to be those hierarchies, they want to be ED. But then there's also the very important invisible power. There's hidden power. And so, for example, one of the things that we aspire to as in terms of feminist leadership is to be able to interrogate the different powers. It doesn't mean that if you're in a certain position, that's the only thing at play. We have to break down the powers and see what are the things that influence how our organization works. Then lastly, which is closely related to power, is the politics and the purpose. And so under the politics, what are the socioeconomic forces that we operate? Somebody has given an example of Zimbabwe where there's only one girl, in a forum that is a capacity building session, and for her even to catch up is actually an issue. So there are so many things that influence the leadership, including the politics that which we operate. And so we must actually have a refined purpose and mission that will inform all the other things that we're developing, including the practice, the principles, and eventually the leadership program. So I think I've taken enough time for now. Yeah.
That's great, Felonie. Thank you for sharing all of that. A whole range of principles, practice, the concept of the importance of sharing, being informed, multi-generational work, really important. Did anyone have any questions for Felonie before I hand over back to Anjana on what you've been listening to? Any areas that you disagreed, that you wanted to challenge, or you wanted to add to or build upon?
Not really challenging or question, but I really like the fact that EWID have got sort of quite strong program in terms of getting women to understand what is feminism first, which I think we may need to go in that direction, because for me, I think it's more important to know why am I feminist? What does that mean? And that for me, I think that's a good, it's a direction for me to choose if I want to become leader or not. But at least having that sort of good understanding, strong grounded position as a feminist, that's a quite interesting one. Before we start even talking about leader, it's very important, because what I've seen even within our organization is we still have diverse opinion regarding feminism. Certain things, for example, boys will never be feminists. other things that we need to involve boys. So we need to have clarity. And certain things that feminism, we have to act in certain way, you know. So we need to be very strong on that. And then like, when we look at our own context, African context, I've been to Zimbabwe where we were trying to build a sort of women forum, and we wanted to emphasize on what we call feminism principle. And I was really amazed because the group colleague that we were working with, they told me we shouldn't use that road because women at community level, they do have bad perception. So we ended up by using sisterhood. So I think we need to sort of unpack all those things, be strong in terms of what is that feminist mean to us. Is it the concept or is it the way of doing or acting? So I think maybe the inspiration from it can be relevant to our work as we are trying to shape it.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Really nice comments, reflections, Audrey. And I think with me personally, you have real resonance with, is it a way of doing and acting rather than the term, the terminology, the history of the term, right? Which has a lot of problems at a local level. Really interesting. I'm just wondering, Anjana, and Anjana and maybe colleagues in ActionAid Bangladesh, it would be great to hear about your perceptions and perhaps national understandings around young feminism. What does it mean to our colleagues from ActionAid Bangladesh in their context?
Thank you, Sarah. We also have Anusha and Farhana. So for Bangladeshi context, I think young feminism means also practice, but looking at the cultural sensitive situation, we can still see that young women are not taking as much lead as it is required. Yeah. And in terms of feminist perspective, we just had a very interesting situation here at the platform. We just started a training on Sunday, and then the girls, participants, they were not allowed to go outside in the evenings by the guard. Yeah. So they are in the training hall, training building entire day. And then in the evening, if they wanted to go out, they were not allowed by the guard. And we asked, why are they not allowed to go? And then the guard mistook that one of the participants, male participant, as an admin staff, and he thought that like he actually instructed the guard not to send girls participants outside because they would become characterless, something similar to that. So when we talk about young feminism, there's still a lot of things to go ahead with. And the girls, they were like, if boys can go out, why not we? So they were very prompt in asking questions, but we still have that mindset where it's still very conservative for young women to take lead and to decide upon themselves. So that is the situation here in Bangladesh. And these are not like young people. These are young people living in a grassroots area where they are doing a lot of community work, but these are not that much unaware of the women's rights issues. So here it becomes a very much a big question where we also need to question ourselves that that still we are doing so much community work. We are working with our partners, but still we still have that mindset in the young people that that gives them the authority to decide about somebody else. So it might just be an incident, but if you look at a general pattern, this is how it is here in Bangladesh. Would you like to add something, Anna?
Well, I'm not actually Bangladeshi, so I don't feel like I can really speak to this experience. But I think when one of my colleagues and I were having a discussion about this, and he said that the situation in Usha is there are lots of NGOs who work on this issue, and they've worked on it for a very long time. And so he was very kind of defeated about the whole situation. I guess the institutionalization of what we do and the effect that the institutionalization of social change in the NGO world and the effect that has on communities, I guess, is something we need to be realistic about.
Yeah.
Yeah, really interesting to hear that. And I guess this goes back to what Felonia was sharing with us, that it's great to have principles, and she had discussed a few of what those principles could look like earlier, but it's the practice. And this all builds into the issues around power and politics that are culturally embedded in all of our societies. So that was a really interesting example to share of young women not being allowed to go out after a training, whereas young men were, and the concepts around security and protection for young women. Really interesting. Did anyone else have any comments or reflections on what Anjana was sharing?
Yeah, I just wanted to share that I think it's great, Anjana, that you bring that example. And that is also why it is very important to focus on young feminists and their leadership. Because like in Africa, we have a proverb that says it's easy to shape the direction of a tree when it's young, when it's a seedling. But once it's old, it's very hard, for them to change their perceptions. And so I think by allowing them also to question, not pointing it out to them, but allowing them to question their circumstances is one of the best ways that, they're able to challenge these structures. Because once they leave the training, they'll go back to the community where they face this kind of challenges every day. So I think the training, the capacity building of young feminists is really a sustainable way, of sustaining the women's rights, where they're able to question these patriarchal structures that are so embedded in the society. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, Felonia. I think that's really important. And I was just wondering, in that example, what was the role of older women? Because I often am quite interested in the role that older women play, sometimes in actually restraining young women's rights, and at other times supporting. So I'd be interested to hear on, in terms of that particular example, if there was a role that was played by older women, but also open that reflection out to the broader group and perhaps other examples.
Sarah, was that the question directed towards us?
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Initially, yeah, I'd just love to know what the role of older women was in support, or actually rather in containment.
Yeah, so we didn't have any older women here, so it's we are at the global platform where we have all young people, but also like when we were developing this entire building, renovating everything, so we were talking with some of our colleagues, and some of our colleagues were very much reluctant to let young women, to put young women behind the gate, so that there not happens any kind of sexual relationship. Yeah, so that is a concern, and so it might not be like the whole socialization process might have made them think in that way, but it was the whole concept of power and protection comes in here as well.
Yeah, great.
So, but with that, but with that specific example, there was no role of older women.
Great, thanks. Audrey, I think you had a comment?
Yeah, I think for me, I can use my own experience first, or maybe share what I've experienced like 2 months ago. We were conducting, I was involved in a field exercise for a research on the impact of women on mining. So in the community discussion, we wanted to discuss with women and ask the partner to also involve girls. In the discussion, we had women, other women, and we had the girls, teenagers, and they were bringing up issues about early pregnancy. And then what came from the group, after one girl actually gave her whole story, how she found pregnant and some of the challenges she's facing. So you could see the criticism on the other, saying that no, because you don't listen. We always tell you that you shouldn't do that, do that. It's more like criminalizing, criticizing. So for my own experience, I'm looking my mom and myself. So we are coming in the same community. We may have same culture, but we don't have same belief in terms of how to apply those culture. My mom still think that I need to be, get married, have kids, be respectable woman, and whatever happened in my life, I need to sort of be a model. For me, I don't think that this is what I need. I may need like to get sometimes decision to say, if for example in my couple there's a problem, I can say I'm going out, I'm going and I'm leaving this relationship. But those are things that my mother will never tolerate, because she still thinks that you are a woman and everything that comes out, every problem you can manage, it's your fault. So this is two different generations. I can justify why my mom is there, she's acting that way. I can justify why I'm quite different, because our generation, we've started the conversation, being involved in a conversation about feminism, women's rights, but on our time that didn't happen. So she still have this sort of mind. And for those who are like my mother, have changed mind because of many processes they've been involved. She's not an activist, she's just a lovely wife at home. So she's having this different mind, and we have most of women in our community, they are like my mom. And it's really a barrier for us young women, girl, to sort of go in a different direction. And then when we talk about feminism, when we talk about, challenging power, within our community, it's become a problem. She will tell you that will never happen. You don't do that. You don't talk back to your dad. You don't talk in front of men. You have, they keep, pushing us to become the model wife or the model girl, while we believe differently. So for us if we want to address the feminism, in terms of getting girls to be young, to be more committed or engaging using feminism principle, we need also to target their mom as well. Because if they don't have this understanding what does that mean, they will continue to, continue to sort of play barrier role. Yeah, but we are doing that already within our own intervention as ActionAid, working with women group in different communities, trying to get them being quite engaged in terms of how to demand for their right. But we are not maybe very strong in terms of how can we get involved girls in those whole processes. So we can have a set of frank conversation, help the women to understand the younger girl role. Because for me, I do believe that things that my mom cannot do, I can do it today. And there's certain struggle that I can do it better than her. So we need to bring this sort of space together, because most of the time when we have group of women, reflection action group, it's elder women, there's no girls. So the approach in terms of how we build girls, strong girl feminists, we don't have it. And it's very good that we are having a week here, and we can learn from what they are doing and see how we can connect the girls' approaches to the women's approaches. We talk about women forum, but we don't talk about girls forum. We talk about HR principle number 3, advancing women's rights, but we are not specific in terms of advancing girls' rights, which is completely different. Because in our community, sometimes other women are the one oppressing girls. Because they grew up in an environment where they believe there's a patriarchy way of living, and they believe in that. So when you start thinking differently, it's a problem.
Yeah, thanks Audrey for sharing your personal but really pertinent experiences. I mean, I think that's interesting, our work, your reflection in terms of our work in ActionAid around girls and women being quite separate, and perhaps sometimes the education team provides some of that bridge, but I agree it can definitely be strengthened. Great. So I guess as we move towards the end of our initial brainstorming session on young feminist leadership, and Jana, I wonder if you had any final comments around how in the training that you're currently piloting around young feminist leadership, how you're defining young feminists or allowing your participants to explore what young feminist means to them. So building on a little bit what Felonia shared, and then Audrey mentioning that it's also a way of doing or acting. It'd be great to hear in terms of your training how you're pitching and how you're allowing the definition around young feminist leadership to emerge.
Thank you for the question, Sarah. So we are also focusing on feminist principle as a practice rather than a concept. So we would be starting with a very basic concept on what is feminism, and then taking it as a personal approach, because what feminism means to me is equality, but we are also trying to focusing it on the feminist charter that would be developed by the end of this month by the Feminist Monitoring and Leadership Group. So we are basically trying to, so we have not set out as a definition kind of a thing. We're still waiting for the feminist charter. Once we have it, we would discuss it among the group and then come up with it. And yeah, so our focus would basically be on how to cultivate feminist leadership skills, because we talk about feminist principle, we talk about feminist concept, but how do we make it as a practice in day-to-day lives? So that is what we would be more focusing on, and on the basis of that, how do we cultivate it? Because leadership skill is not something you just attend a training and then just get it. So how do we cultivate it over the time at both personal and professional life? So that would be our main objective out of this training.
Great, thank you for sharing that. So it seems that there's a current theme that we're talking about, which is young feminist leadership as a practice based around equality, practical experiences, so a lived experience. And I'm just going back to Felonie really sharing with us, and I think we can learn a lot from Awid as well, echoing Audrey's points. So Felonie talking around principles for Awid of sharing, being informed, multi-generational organizing, and then there was collaboration, and then the issue of leadership being about practice, principles, power, politics. Felonie, was there anything that I missed out of your nice little recipe?
No, you haven't missed anything. Just to add a few things based on the discussion as we wind up, is that I think also what we've learned over the years is that it's a challenge to practice feminist leadership. Unfortunately, there is no template that says this is the way you should do it. It's a journey, sometimes painful, but about exploration and experimenting what will work. And why do I say this? This is because that while we embrace the feminist theories, we do realize that all of us have different histories, all of us have different personalities, all of us have different identities, and this sometimes gets in the way of our feminist leadership and our feminist work. And so lastly, we also must acknowledge that in as much as we are when we practice our feminist leadership, we are constantly surrounded by patriarchal structures, and these structures are embodied around power and leadership. And so you're really getting your hands dirty in where patriarchy thrives. And then lastly, just some tips on what we have learned in terms of women's movement doing as best practices to practice feminist leadership, is that it has to be a conscious part of our movement building strategy. It cannot be a one-off. And so, for example, Anjana, just to encourage you, that even the capacity building you're doing in Bangladesh cannot be a one-off. It has to be a conscious part, and always revisiting the participants who are in that training. Secondly, is to ensure that everybody gets to be a leader at some point. And so encouraging the rotating leadership, which more or less encourages the multi-generational organizing. Because one of the things we've also learned and had within the movement is young feminists and the older feminists have different priorities. And sometimes the older feminists feel that we don't appreciate the work they've done. We are coming in and we come in like they've not been working on anything. So that's having that conversation to unpackage that maybe our priorities are what speaks to our realities. Your priorities, if you decide to work on equal pay, for equal work, it spoke to your reality. Perhaps our reality is more on the sexual and reproductive health, and that's why we feel so strongly about it. So encouraging that space for conversation and in terms of your program of young feminist leadership. And then lastly, at the end of the day, what we've found as a best practice is also to have some kind of way of redressing leaders who are not able to embody the principles and the politics that we are talking about. Because at the end of the day, like you say, not all women are feminists, and also not all feminists are women. So it's really an ideology that people have to embrace. Yeah, so that's it for me.
Oh, great. Thank you so much. I mean, I guess as we wrap up now, I just wanted to hear from everyone if we had any further questions that we still need to ask ourselves within ActionAid around young feminist leadership.
So were you asking the group, Sarah?
Yes, please.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I think I should know what's happening, but I don't really know what's happening next in terms of the support, especially internal to ActionAid, and how we're supporting young women in the federation. Because I know with the global platforms, the training, there'll be links to activistas, but it's like, what about the young staff, the young women, the young men as well, about understanding feminist principles? Are young people inputting into the development of these principles? So yeah, so it's a bit more of a practical, like, right, how do we get this going? And how do we define, because we know with ActionAid there are some very, very diverse opinions about what feminism is and what a feminist looks like. So it'd be interesting to find out how they're going to deal with that debate.
Yeah, great, Catherine. So I think that's really important question, and I guess we don't necessarily have all the answers yet. But I think perhaps working much more closely with our internal what's it called, FMLG, the Feminist Monitoring Group, and maybe establishing stronger connections with their work is one way we could go. Did anyone else have any other questions that you still feel that we need to probe further?
I don't have a question, but I just wanted to say that AWID is happy to work with you in this, and I'll probably be following up with you, Sarah or Anjana, in terms of more information about, for example, are you using a curriculum for the trainings, and what other kind of support you'd like to get from us as well. So happy to come on board.
Fantastic, that's great news, and I'll connect you directly to Anjana. Brilliant, and hopefully we'll all keep in touch. Fantastic, so thank you so much for this initial brainstorming around young feminist leadership. It's been really exciting to hear from all of you about your personal experiences, your work, etc. Just to say that we will continue some of this discussion for those that weren't able to join in our live hangout, and that will go into our community of practice, which is a D group. So some of you have been sent invites, so if you haven't, please connect with me and I'll make sure that happens. And those of you that have been sent an invite, please do join. Thomas and Theus and Casper are on tech support with all of that. So a huge thank you to Thomas today for being that tech support, but also further support in terms of our community of practice. We'll be sharing the link from this YouTube again so that we make sure that others across our federation can listen to all of your interesting and useful inputs. So that will also be going out via the community of practice. And I think Catherine's point about what next really practically is really important. So two small things. One will be collecting Filonier to the work that Anjana's leading around the training capacity, and then I think the other small area will be making sure that we're really connecting back with Christy and Annie, and Audrey, hopefully you can be our internal champion in that group as well. I'll make sure that I connect back and share with Christy and Annie this hangout, but also trying to push things further as well. So thank you very much from London. Perhaps we can do a round of goodbyes from each of our countries. So it's goodbye from me in London.
Goodbye from Audrey and I in Joburg.
Kwaheri from fellow Jean in Nairobi.
Kwaheri.
Goodbye from Bangladesh. I don't know how do we say goodbye. Goodbye from Bangladesh.
Bidai from Bangladesh.
And finally, Thomas in Denmark.
Goodbye again from Denmark and Jan Thies. Okay. Please contact me if you have questions, right?
Great. Thanks all. Bye now.
Bye.